What we need to call for is a new kind of contract between the citizen and the state. And we know a lot about the role of the citizen and the state, we know about the rule of law, but the responsibility to protect citizens by states needs to extend beyond the narrow parochial agendas that we have at the moment to look at the world that we now live in and look at the vulnerabilities that we face.
I think we do need to look ahead and anticipate the kinds of challenges that are going to beset, yes, developing countries, but also industrialized countries that are on the screen. The projection of urbanization, the projection of some of the climate issues, some of the governance issues in the future, and then try and anticipate collectively how we can face up to those.
It is urgent for states to step up to their basic task of allowing their citizens to live fulfilled and fulfilling lives. Ones which today they are not able to, because they cannot access schools, they cannot access healthcare, and they cannot access some of the basic amenities of a decent life.
I think the contract between the citizen and the state, when it comes to the new humanitarianism, society as a whole has to think futuristically. They have to think about the nature of these challenges in the future and embed people's ideas at the lowest levels of society into the process of preparing for the future.
You've got to have leadership to help people start to engage in these issues, and then allow people just time to perhaps run wild. And we're talking here about creative thinking, because we're building scenarios and ideas for situations which we can imagine some of them, but some of them will have to just come out of thin air, and then we've got to work with them. So creativity is absolutely fundamental in here.
Without that creativity and risk-taking, you're just thinking about today rather than looking forward many years. So I think that's critical, at least as far as the US government is concerned.
This new paradigm is something which we are also working out. It is a work in progress. So the feel that you have when you look at new paradigms is it's a building, it's a construction site, but not yet a completed building. And that's one of the biggest challenges.
First and foremost, I would say, is a paradigm that needs to change in regards to reacting versus anticipating. Climate change today is a challenge so big, and yet an opportunity so large, that governments must use this opportunity to anticipate and finally step up to the plate of better planning, so that they may be able to know when it is that a disaster is going to strike them.
The old paradigms are unlikely to be as automatically workable. And indeed, even now, I think it's fair to say that we have not been able to even face up to the challenges that we had to look at in 2010 with Haiti and Pakistan.
I worked in Afghanistan in 2001, 2002, and at the time Ashraf Ghani told me that he was very disappointed with what the US had to offer, because he said that we were giving him 20th century solutions for what he termed as 21st century problems. In other words, we were just rehashing everything that we had done in the past rather than thinking more creatively and along new lines for how to address problems that in many cases were the same as we'd faced before, but in new contexts and with new characters and new actors.
The new paradigm shift that needs to happen in order to involve, at least if you like, the global humanitarian sector in new ways that they can deal with the challenges of the 21st century will be twofold. We need to trace those champions of change from one level, from the very local level to the national level within governments. But I think secondly, the way we think about humanitarianism in the 21st century has to shift. The paradigm shift in that area must be that the theories of the past, that has to change. That thinking has to be quick on its feet. It also has to think of a broad horizon.
Such a paradigm shift of moving from response to anticipation is needed among humanitarians as well. Because today we are learning that more and more climate-related disasters are striking areas such as Africa and impacting communities and wreaking havoc all throughout them across the continent. So humanitarians as well, within their relief and disaster relief work, ought to also learn to use some of these tools for climate risk management today made available by climate science and use them to better plan their interventions, making them more targeted, knowing when and where they will occur so that they can better ask for funds and better know how and where to target their interventions.
We have to strengthen accountability domestically. Most governments are realizing that we live in an interconnected world. So an earthquake in Pakistan does affect voters in Britain because there's a huge Pakistani diaspora here in Britain. An earthquake in Taiwan does affect Britain because it affects the computer industry. The financial crisis does affect Britain because it affects the investment banking industry. So in an interconnected world, I don't think we can see borders and our responsibilities as focused on simply the geographic area that we might have provenance in. It extends beyond those things.
It is time for the governments to step up and fulfill their role and reinstate their contract between them and their citizens, which is a contract based on public service delivery and based on the ability to be able to give their citizens a quality life and an opportunity to build for themselves such a quality of life.
It would be wonderful if the UN, through bodies like OCHA and the Interagency Standing Committee, would be able to reinvent themselves. Organizations are not usually good at reinventing themselves, and it may well be that others will determine a new mandate for them.
What the world suffers from is too much disintegration and fragmentation. And we are looking at really important survival issues, biodiversity here, you're looking at environment there, you're looking at climate change in the middle, disaster third, poverty, and it's not clear that it comes together in a very strong way so that we can say, here's the action plan to ensure that people can live well on this planet.
I'm saying that the future holds diverse, if you like, categories of crises and challenges for society as a whole. And those who are going to experience those challenges are already experiencing them even now in anecdotal forms. We need to gather those experiences in a way that society can better map them and prepare people and governments for the future.
There's been quite a lot of work done on what is needed to move to new mindsets. And one of the most examples is the work that Thomas Kuhn did on the structure of scientific paradigms. What he identified in that work was that mindsets emerge slowly. New ideas often exist in parallel with old ideas. And you have certain tipping points, you have certain moments where those ideas prove their legitimacy or prove their validity over and above the old ideas. So I think that's what we've got to look for. It's not going to be something where we can see a linear transfer. We can't displace the existing model. We've got to see opportunities to be able to communicate the value of the new paradigm.
When we're thinking about the future, we have to, again, think beyond what we know about and what we see on a day-to-day basis. It's about what has never happened, perhaps, but what could. And that requires, again, going back to the term creativity, ability to think beyond what you know about and what you've heard about in the past.
My opinion of the humanitarian community, if you like, the humanitarian sector, at the moment, is that that sector tends to react. It's very rare. We're beginning to see a trend analytically that tells society and that tells the sector to think far ahead. But in terms of, by habit, this is a sector that still continues to react instead of look to the future.
On the question of whether we are investing enough in preparing ourselves strategically and operationally for what are going to be future disasters, what are going to be future crises, no, we're not. We're historically an industry and a sector that responds well. We've learned how to provide effective responses to disasters, but we have never been brought up in a culture of preparing ourselves for the type of disasters that are going to be coming our way.
If we had to come to the rescue and to the relief of 2 or 3 people yesterday, today we have to come to the rescue of 30 to 35 more people. In the span of 7 years alone, in our region of West Africa, humanitarian interventions have increased by a factor of 3. Humanitarians cannot continue fulfilling some of those basic services where the governments have to come in and speak. And even if they were able to, I say today that it is time for those governments to really be conscious of their responsibility towards their citizens. And their irresponsibility has deadly consequences of people where I am from and all around.
We desperately need to do something new. I think what's going to be facing us in the next 20 years is the issue of megacities. And be it earthquakes, be it global warming, the complexity involved in the centers of 10 million plus is well beyond the capacity and ken of what the humanitarian community has dealt with to date. So yes, we need to bring in government, we need to bring in civil society, need to bring in the military, private sector, a whole new range of actors.
In the past it's been called sustainable development. And maybe that word has become so overused, so we need to give it some new energy. But there is an issue of coherence that really would be the vision that I think we should strive for now.
The nature of disasters we will see, the nature of a humanitarian crisis that we'll witness in the 21st century might be contained within small spaces, but with the potential to spread out easily and with the potential to stretch the humanitarian community, if you like, or the sector as a whole. We need to begin to upscale local ideas for dealing with those emergencies.
Well, I think that we need to have a far broader dialogue than we're having at the moment, and one of the concerns I have is that we're really caught up in the current constructs of what we consider to be humanitarian assistance. And what's happening is that there are new players coming in to provide assistance in a very different way. For example, in Somalia, the diaspora are providing at least as much money as the traditional humanitarian donors and organizations, but in a very different way. And using new technologies, getting greater penetration of their assistance than we can, and yet the dialogue between us is minimal.
Huge advances and leaps in climate science over the past 50 years, literally, leading up to the 1997-1998 prediction of the El Niño, have made it so that today a range of climate forecasting tools and climate risk management tools are available to decision makers all over the world.
When we're thinking about the future, we have to, again, think beyond what we know about and what we see on a day-to-day basis. It's about what has never happened, perhaps, but what could.